anymore. And as you can see, the majority of the files here in these archives, they're from, well, they're not only, they're from members of the public, and then from senior pilots. Yeah, there's one Air Commodore Michael Swinney, right? Because I have millions of things going around my head, so I have to think. But Air Commodore Michael Swinney, what a smashing bloke! Lived in Hampshire, and he had a sighting. I think about 52. He was flying an RAF plane, and he saw this thing and reported on it, and a report went to the MOD. And when Michael tried to get his report back some years later, it was told that it had been destroyed, it was not available. But hey ho, when he eventually got onto the MOD as a senior officer there, or somebody I think was in charge, he found his report. So what is going on there? What are these agencies that lie behind this? Why do they dictate what we're going to see and what we're not going to see? Because again, I've know a number of pilots I've interviewed that have seen things, saucer-shaped objects, or all manner of strange things they've seen in the sky. But as we said before, predominantly triangular UFOs, or objects forming a triangle, i.e. at each point 1, 2, 3 lights with sometimes a light in the middle. I think if you look through the Derbyshire, Staffordshire area in 96, 97, the skies were full of these objects. It's like we sit here now, and one can sort of imagine that slowly coming over the trees that lie approximately a few hundred yards away. Over the top of those trees would be this huge black triangle with a light in the middle and lights at the side, moving majestically over the British landscape, with apparent impunity, as if I don't care what man thinks. And that happened a lot in the 95s, but nobody even mentioned disclosure then. So don't know what it means, don't think it's going to do anything, because I think the subject is too big.
But would you think that King Charles knows more than we do?
Well, I doubt it. Why would he? Would you say that would if you discuss this with Richie Sunak, he'd probably look at you as if you were mad, like he'd look at me if I was mad? Because you see, because he's not educated. He bases his opinions, like anybody else, as we all do, on education. And if you've only come across the you know, a few cases, the famous cases, Betty and Barney Hill and the Rendlesham Forest incident and others like that, you'd think, well, give or take, how can we treat these as seriously? Are you sure people haven't been mistaken? Are you sure it wasn't the lighthouse? Are you sure it wasn't the satellite, which is thinking about the satellite? But when you look at all these reports and sightings, it does make you think. And the other thing is, why is the subject not on the school curriculum?
Well, maybe
Why is that not? I think it is in the States.
Wow,
but yeah, it's so. All I'm trying to do is educate people. I can't give any answers, but it is, as I think, as Gordon Creighton said, it is one of the greatest phenomena of modern day times. Whether you are a skeptic or not, it is still the greatest phenomena of modern day times. And it is, isn't it?
It is.
Because the bloody things keep coming through. They do, don't they? Yeah, and that's it.
So, in your opinion, who knows the truth about what these things are? Does anyone?
It's a difficult question. So it's difficult to answer, rather. But one would presume that, given the amount of finances available to governments and the super intelligence of scientists, one would have thought they'd have come up with some ideas on this. And if they have come up with the ideas, what it is and where it comes from, well, I can tell you one thing: you and I aren't going to know, because it would cause too much disruption. It would actually. So on the one hand, yes, I want to get the messages across. Yes, I like you. I liked Discovery. I'd like us to be all lay our cards on the table, but in reality, it will not happen, because I don't think you can explain it away as. You can't just explain it away just like that, because I can't say you can do that. I mean, when I first started this, I used to, I looked at the sightings of saucer-shaped objects, and they talk about flying saucers in the 40s and 50s, then the UFOs, then the UAPs, which always reminds me of UAP, it sounds like something to do with a cow, but UAP, it's just another idea, isn't it? Which it's better to say UAPs than flying saucers. But for goodness sake, these things are saucer shaped. They're any damn shape. So something intelligence, I presume, is causing those shapes to change and move about. And then people used to say, well, I saw some figures near these things, which is certainly jumping me back into the archives, and about the copper that I saw in Devon, who was on duty, and they had a lorry driver come in to see him, and this lorry driver had been on the way home and stopped at a lay-by, and he'd seen in a nearby field a saucer-shaped object with what appears to be Y3 occupants, small occupants, examining the ground, and that takes me back to Hertfordshire, and I thought to myself, well, that's impossible. They can't have people in them like us because of the speed they move, but this isn't about people like us, is it? It's nothing to do with us. It's an energy that is probably able to manipulate itself, or make us see what we expect to see, or what we contrive to see, because it's something it's really beyond our understanding. It's certainly beyond mine. But the amount of times people have seen these things, and sometimes they've left physical traces as well. There's just I've come across thousands. But the integrity and the honesty of those witnesses that I've spoken to is not an issue, because so many people have got a lot to lose by even finding the courage to come forward and just say what they've seen.
Yeah, and that comes across from this archive, going through the thousands of documents. You can see people's testimony. There's diagrams, they've got explanations of what they saw, but there's something out there that ordinary people are seeing, but we don't know what it is.
Well, we don't know, you're right. I mean, this is just, I think I'm just going to see if I can possibly, this is March 1996, and if I can, it's difficult with the camera and everything, but some of these are from a guy called Ron West, used to run the Essex, this is a UFO research group, and this was going to be dumped, but fortunately we managed to get hold of it. Each is a illustration, is an interview with a witness, and this is just March. Look, so if we were to sit, gentlemen, if we were to sit here all day and all night doing this, that'd be fantastic. Unfortunately, the cake would have disappeared. So I mean, look, I mean, it's incredible, and that's just 1 month.
So what about your personal experience? I'm particularly interested in getting your thoughts on...
What's that?
On the Rendlesham Forest incident, which has been called the Britain's Roswell, and I know you co-authored a book with the Colonel involved in that. Can you just tell us a bit?
Well, I've done two books with the Colonel, the Holt book 1 and the Holt Perspective book 2. Rendlesham, the first time I was attracted to Rendlesham was I saw a photograph of Brenda Butler and Dot Street in the forest, and they had this lovely dog with them, and I thought, well, I thought I'd love to get in contact with Brenda Butler, and I did, and I've been firm friends with her since, and it was her birthday last week. And what happened was we used to go down to the forest once a month, and walk around the forest, and Brenda would walk till sometimes 2 or 3 o'clock. My God, that was like, well, I can't describe that. What a fantastic lady. But of course, she was the first person to know about the Rendlesham Forest incident was Chris Pennington, who was her then partner, and he was told I'm not going to run through the whole story, it takes us ages, but he was told what had happened by one of the airmen, and then Brenda picked up on that and was told about it, and so she and Dot and Jenny Randalls also went down and interviewed many of the servicemen and Colonel Holt, and as I say, a lot of people say it can be difficult getting involved. I certainly found many conflicting statements, as we discussed before, with the Rendlesham Forest incident. But I wasn't there. I don't know. But I've always had a lot of time for Colonel Holt, because I think he's a gentleman. When he left, his name is Charles Irwin Holt. Many people didn't know what the I meant for about 25 years, neither did I. And it just goes to show there's so much about the guy. And when he left, and he was in there a few years. When he left, he went to Korea. He was a colonel there. And then when he went, and then he really sort of more or less before his retirement, he took over security of all the armed forces in America at the Pentagon. And when I went over there last time, well, a couple of times back, with my 2 friends, we stopped off at the Pentagon and walked up to the security guard, and we just said, can we have a look round? My God. He says to Mike, well, the public aren't allowed here, don't you? We didn't realise that. We thought you could walk into the Pentagon. And then he said, well, did you know somebody here? And I said, well, yes, we are friends of Colonel Holt. He says, well, who's Colonel Holt? I said he was here about 20 years ago. So then we got out. But I've been to the States a couple of times, and as I say, met Chuck, as he's known. He's a smashing bloke. But that's what, as I say, when I originally spent time in the forest with Brenda and others, people used to come up to me and say, oh, did you see that golden orb coming up the forest floor, or that thing in the sky? And I thought to myself, oh, did you see it? Oh, I thought to myself, my God, they're imagining it. And then I saw these things myself and even photographed them.
What were they?
Sorry?
What were they?
Well, I don't know.
Okay, but what did they look like?
Sorry?
What did they look like?
Well, orbs floating a few feet off the floor, crackling with energy near Lefted Eastgate. On the 27th of December 2000, I filmed, we were in the forest then, suddenly this thing appeared in the sky and began to rotate over Capel Green. So we filmed it, and I've got the film here. It's gone out many times, but so I can't explain that. And for me, the most strangest things was the apports of stones, because what happened, we'd go to a part of the forest where nobody had followed us, because they were needed the light. It was pitch black, and I always made sure that Brenda was first, not me, because as you go through the forest in the morning, it's covered in cobwebs, and if you're not careful, in these cobwebs is a big spider. And the last thing you want to do as going first is to get a spider on your face. I don't like spiders. Who does? But Brenda used to go first, and there was a party of about 6 or 7 of us, and then we'd stop, and then we'd sit down, and we'd just, I don't use the word meditate. I think we'd just sit down there and be quiet for a few minutes and just relax, and then it would be black as hell out there, pitch dark, and then suddenly you'd hear something go thud onto the floor, and you'd sweep your torch round, and you'd see, you wouldn't see the stone that had fallen, but because there were stones everywhere, but you would then touch the stones, and one of these stones was so hot you could hardly handle it. Now, what life force?
Don't think we should wait until the encounter occurs, but that we should do all in our power to prepare ourselves for it. The manner in which we first meet may determine the character of all our subsequent relations. Let us never forget the fatal impact we've had upon innumerable peoples on this earth, peoples of our own species who trusted us, befriended us, and who we destroyed by our thoughtlessness and insensitivity to their needs and their vulnerabilities. The simple truth is that before we can communicate with others successfully, we must first learn to communicate with ourselves successfully, and we're a long way from having achieved that. Perhaps that is where we ought to begin, with ourselves, learning to communicate with ourselves, with all the different peoples and nations of the earth.
I suppose if you were to ask what instrument would be the image of the announced topic, you surely would say people are going to talk about what they see through a telescope. But in fact, at least most of the speakers have really spoken on the topic what they see in a mirror. Now, that's not in any way wrong. Perhaps the most valuable part of this extraordinary enterprise is going to be the mirror which we confront ourselves obliquely and in all sorts of ways as we try to ask the question of what the future is like in the dim future, of how we're going to get over ourselves to reach that future, and so on. So I'm not prepared to say that this is wrong. But as a somewhat matter-of-fact discussant in the affair, I feel that I'm somewhat inclined to direct some attention to what I think it really will be like, and not to these mirror-like discussions, which are undoubtedly more important in our present state of mind, which somehow I think will be perhaps supported by taking a calmer look at what the real situation is. Professor Wald, for example, defending magnificently the creativity, which is one of the great pillars of our time, feels that if somebody would tell him the answer, it would be kind of cheating. And Dr. Montague, on the other hand, is quite concerned lest this contact bring physical and mental harm to those persons those beings whom we might hypothetically contact. It's probable, I think, I would say if I were a debater, I would argue these two really somewhat cancel each other out. It can hardly be both ways. I think, on the contrary, that an enormous distance separates us from the nearest existing or even memorable group of a similar kind. And just enormous distance, not the distance to the moon, not the distance to the planets, not the distance to the nearest stars, but tens or even hundreds or perhaps 1,000 times that distance. That means that even traveling at the speed of light, no round trip is likely to be imaginable. No answer to communication. They say hello, you say how are you, and he says fine. That conversation will take at least centuries.
Yeah, sure. I mean, my own experience when I was a child, I had this face appear on the wall, a bit like an angel coming to warn me, but giving me hope that everything would be all right. It was like this blue shining light on the wall, kind of opened up like a portal. I interpreted it at the time as an angelic experience.
Yeah.
But now I look back on it thinking, yeah, it could be just how I interpreted it at the time, having a slightly religious upbringing with a Greek, very religious nanny. So it was very nice and one of my saving graces. But I interpreted that at the time as an angelic, but it could well be a extraterrestrial, I guess, or the same thing, just unexplained. Something we don't quite understand. Who knows?
But interestingly, you perceived it as a benevolent.
I did, yeah.
And I think if it wasn't benevolent, I think you maybe would have experienced it differently.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't had that non-malicious experience, I should say. But people do say that if they had alien abductions, it's not pleasant. And then John from the UFO archive, he says that as well. It's like, these aren't pleasant experiences that these people have, but there's thousands of them documented all around the world.
There's so much evidence out there, isn't there? That there must be something that can't just be explained by.
No, I mean, going to this UFO archive was eye-opening for me, because it comes from, you see stuff, you read stuff, but when you see the physical files, thousands of them, you're thinking, okay, this is not just someone making it up. This is, documented cases all around the UK that, very credible people have, including lots of police officers. It's, it's amazing.
And police officers, for example, they've got everything to lose by talking about this stuff. They've got their credibility, their whole life's, experiences.
Yeah, many of them have. I mean, there's a famous case of Alan Godfrey in Todmorden in West Yorkshire, and it was in the 80s as well, and he saw this craft on the way to work about 5 or 6 in the morning, and there was damage to his shoe, and he was all shaken up, and he had 20 odd minutes of missing time. But he reported it, but it kind of ruined his life, his career a little bit. People weren't taking him seriously, but corroborating witnesses have come forward more recently to give validation to his claims. But his encounter was otherworldly. It was weird. And John goes on to tell about a helicopter pilot that saw one in London, gave chase to a UFO. It was supposed to be giving chase to a robbery that was going on, but this craft appeared, so they chased this. And when he got down and reported it, he was told not to talk about it, and he was warned off by some military people, men in black, whatever you want to say. Didn't want him talking about it. So people maybe were too scared to come forward and tell the truth. So John's got his archive, thousands of documents. These are people who've been brave enough to come forward. Imagine all the ones that people have been warned off, not brave enough for fear of ridicule, to come forward and give their testimony. There must be so much more out there.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
But what is it? It's the eternal question.
Robert Taylor, he was aged 61 years of age. He was a war hero. When he was a young man, he fought in the Second World War. He was in the Forfarshire Yeomanry, and his tank regiment was one of the first regiments that liberated Bergen-Belsen. And he saw some terrible sights. After the war, he went into landscape, he was in forestry department. And he eventually, after the war, he worked for Livingston Development Corporation in the forestry department. He had no belief in UFOs. He had heard things on the radio, he saw the odd thing on the TV. He had no interest in UFOs, not at all, as most people do. Now, all that changed. On the morning of November the 9th, 1979, he was in his pickup truck. He was accompanied on this journey into Decmont Woods with his Irish red setter dog Lara. A journey that he had done many, many times before. His job was to ensure that no cattle or sheep strayed into the woods and got lost, and make sure everything in the forest is fine. He got out of his truck, he walked with his dog along this forestry ride, which took him towards a clearing, about 40 feet clearing. Sitting above this clearing, about 30, 40 feet above this clearing, was this dome-shaped craft with a flange going around its perimeter, with cross-like projections sticking up from this flange. He couldn't believe what he's seeing. What the hell is this? And then it solidified, then it de-solidified, materialized, dematerialized. You could see the young trees in the background, they got solid again. What the hell is this? And his dog's barking at this thing, And as if this whole strange scenario couldn't have got any weirder, it did. for what happened then was what resembled two Second World War sea mines. You know those mines you got in the North Atlantic?
Yeah,
Spherical mines with the spikes sticking out, bobbed in on them. Resembled that, dropped down from the beneath this object and impacted on the grass. They started rolling across the grass towards him. He's going, oh my God, what's this, what's this? And then they stopped. Then he projected these rod-like projections to his hips and pulled him very forcibly. Now, just before he lost consciousness, which he did do, he remembers a horrible burning smell pervading the whole area. There was also a swishing sound as well, and then he lost consciousness. When he regained consciousness, he found that, thank God, the larger object has disappeared, the smaller object was gone, and were over 30 to 40 marks or holes in the grass. Circular, triangular marks in the grass, and also track-like marks in the grass as well. He had a nasty graze under his chin, he had a graze on his head, he had a powerful headache, he had a really terrible thirst, his throat was dry. His clothes were all muddy and his trousers were torn. He walked back to his pickup truck and he radioed base, but he couldn't speak. He had lost his voice. And he managed to somehow reverse the truck into a little ditch, and the back wheels are spinning and he couldn't get out of the ditch. So he had to more or less crawl back to his home in Deans, which is near the forest, near Deckwood Woods. And when his wife saw him, she went, "What the hell's happened to you?" And he said these immortal words, and I'll say it to yourself and your viewers and your listeners. He said, "I've been attacked." "You've been attacked? Attacked by who?" And he says, "By a spaceship." And she says, "Oh, come in, there's no such a thing as a bloody spaceship. Come in." And then she thought, she went, "I know my man. I know my husband. I've been married to him for over 40 years. He wouldn't make this up. What happened to you?" So he proceeded to tell her. And then she phoned for the local GP. The local doctor became involved, and he took Bob's vitals. His heart was elevated. He was quite excited. And then he said, "Look, I recommend that you go to Bangor Hospital for a proper evaluation. Clearly something's happened to you." Okay. So he went to the nearby hospital and he waited and he waited and he waited. He waited 2 hours. Nobody came near him. So he discharged himself. He got fed up waiting. Prior to that, Bob's boss, Malcolm Drummond, came to the home, and both men, Malcolm and Bob, went back up to the area, and Bob said, "There you are, look, there's all the marks in the grass." So Malcolm Drummond says, "Well, you've been assaulted." So it became a police inquiry. So what happened was the local Bathgate and Livingston police came to the area. "Oh God, yeah, there's the marks in the grass." They fenced off the area with chicken wire fence, and they did a proper and full investigation. An investigation was also undertaken, a forensic investigation was taken on Robert's trousers, and the trousers were analysed in Edinburgh by forensic scientist Lester Knibb, who says to me and other people, he says, "Malcolm, these trousers were ripped in an upwards manner. These trousers were not ripped by any forest debris, sharp stones, barbed wire." And in point of fact, I have the trousers here with me. I'll show you, with them. These are like the Turin threads of mythology. And I take them on tours and lectures. These are one of the rips on the trousers here. I hope you can see that coming up there. Yeah. And if we look on the left-hand side of the trousers, you have a different rip there.
Wow.
So these were analysed by the forensic department, and they said, these were ripped in an upwards manner. And to cut a long story short, back in 1993, we erected a stone cairn with the help of the Livingston Corporation, just basically saying that a strange event happened there. Then a couple of years ago, with the help of the West Lothian Council, we erected signage to direct, because people were coming from all over the world and they didn't know where to find this place. Whereas in Rendlesham Forest, you have all these signs, go this way, go that way. And I said, we've got to do this. We've got to do this at Deckman. So, long story short, I managed to get this sign, and I'm quite proud of that. I managed to get the signage up there, and it's a massive case. And Bob always said, he says, Malcolm, did I walk into this at the right time or the wrong time? Was this meant for me or not meant for me? Now, when I wrote a book on this case, and any book I write, I always try to look at the other side of the coin, because it'd be wrong of me just to say, I believe this. There's 11 theories. There's 11 alternative theories to possibly explain this encounter, and I put those in my book.
So what's your ultimate conclusion about his experience? What was it?
For me personally, I believe Bob was, whether it was in the right place at the right time or wrong time, he walked into a scenario that may or may not have been meant for him. I think he saw something not of this world. I mean, for instance, one of the theories was that Bob ingested berries called Atropa belladonna, which taken in substance, it can be quite hallucinogenic, and bad doses, it can actually kill.
But why would
But
he
I don't
do
think
that?
it was that. I don't think it was that.
But why would he do that? Why would he take the berries if he's, lives near there? He's going to know. He works in the forest.
Absolutely correct. An educated man like Robert Taylor would never dream of saying, "Oh, that's on a poisonous berry. Let's have some of it." And I did some research, and I found out that there are no Atropa belladonna in Decmant Woods, so there are no berries of that nature anyway. Yeah.
What about, you mentioned about these things that came out that looked like mines?
Yeah.
Do you think maybe whatever it was he experienced, they put those things as mines because that's what he could relate to, having been in the war, being a soldier? Do you think that's a possibility?
Of course it is. Absolutely. And I'm glad you brought that up, because when Bob went over to France on D-Day 5, he wasn't first on D-Day 1, he was D-Day 5. It's fair to say when he went over to France on one of those, it was with his tank regiment, that he may have seen, he may have seen some of these mines bobbing about the North Atlantic. One would have thought that they would have exploded them so that no British ships got exploded on the way to France, so there shouldn't have been any mines there. But as a soldier, he would have been aware of these type of mines. So skeptics quite rightly say, was it a medical episode? Maybe something happened that he maybe dreamt up these mines, but they have the marks in the grass. Now, these marks in the grass were not there prior to that event. And the reason I say that is because we checked with the Forestry Department. The police investigated that as well. And former Detective Constable Ian Wark, he says, Malcolm, whatever came down at Decmant Woods came down like that and went up again, because there were no marks leading away from the area or to the area. These marks were just at that area.
Yeah, I mean, it's very, very strange, and you've got to keep an open mind about it, I think. But I just wondered what this thing was and why. I guess we're never going to find out at the end of the day.
Well, that's true. It's difficult.
I'm Judd Roberts in Roswell, and I was a minority stockholder and the manager of a radio station here back in those days. Radio station? KGFL. Okay. And we got word of it with the rancher himself.
Word of the crash?
Oh, I beg your pardon, of this UFO.
Uh-huh.
Of course, there was a release that came out of Walt Hutt's PIO department out at Walker Air Force Base. Mm-hmm. And so we followed it up. I did not go out because I
to the crash site.
I did not go out to the crash site. Excuse me for being so hesitant about this. If I'd look at the camera instead of you, it perhaps would be easier.
Well, that's why I'm sitting over here so you can talk to me.
Okay, so that's it. Be that as it may,
So you were aware of something going on out there?
Definitely. And then
directly from Walter's press release or other sources?
Other sources. As a matter of fact, I don't know whether I should say this or not, but it was true. We hid out the rancher for one night.
Where were they?
Yeah.
Where?
Yes, and we did some transcriptions with him and so forth. Good old wire recorders, if you will.
Where did you hide him out?
We had him out at Mr. Whitmore's house here in town. He lived outside of the city limits on the east side.
So you were present at the actual interview?
I was not.
You were not.
I was trying to run the station at that time. The question that we ran into is the very next morning, some friendly person, probably from Clinton Anderson's office, called us from Washington and said, we understand that you have some information, and we want to assure you that if you release it on this matter, because it's not supposed to be released, it's very possible that your license could be in jeopardy, and so we suggest that you not do it. And he said, when I mean in jeopardy, like maybe 3 days.
Was there any suggestion when you got that phone call? I mean, did Walt Whitmore hesitate about releasing the information? Did he say, well, we're not going to release it, or we might release it?
I made that decision.
So
you got the call?
Yes, I was at the office, you see. See, W.E. Whitmore, with whom I worked, had different office hours than you and I. And he was a great nighttime worker, and he came in about 6 o'clock at night to talk to me about the radio business, about the time since I'd been there since 6 o'clock in the morning.
So you got the phone call from Washington?
Yes, yes.
And they told you that your license was in jeopardy. Did you?
They indicated that would be a very negative thing.
What convinced you that they meant business and you were really talking to somebody important?
I don't even remember who it was who identified himself.
Was there any?
But he convinced you.
But he convinced me because they'd already made such a stir about the releases, you see, to the newspapers and so forth. And so, in other words, the clamps went on the story, but this was not unusual for me because I had been down here for a couple of years at that time from Minneapolis, and with things like air crashes at Walker Air Force Base or the problems of that sort, it was not unusual for us to talk to the people and they'd say, okay, we've got a release date on this and not before this time. Of course, we always fought it because they always tried to take care of the afternoon newspaper.
Well, that was where my question was going. When you got the phone call from Washington, was there any thought about going ahead to release the story anyway, or did you just immediately kill it?
No, we did not. We didn't think so. We didn't know of it.
So when you got the phone call, that was it. The story was done.
That was as far as I was concerned.
Okay.
I saw no reason to do it because they'd already had the disclaimers out there, 10 tons of them, talking about these weather balloons and so forth. And so that was it. The point is that I was unable, I never did see the material. I talked to people just as you have.
Who did you talk to?
I can't remember. Can't remember at all.
Now you say you hid out, or Walt Whitmore hid out Brazil overnight on...
Oh yes, but it was W.E. Whitmore.
Yes, we understand.
Senior. No, senior.
So he had the 45-minute wire recording of Brazel's interview that...
I don't know how long it was. In those days with wire recorders, these are guys all before your time. And if you recorded 15 minutes, you took it back to the studio and it took you 15 minutes to rewind them at 3.75 or whatever it was.
Do you remember whatever happened to that wire recording? Was it erased?
No, I haven't. At that particular time, there was quite a clamp on discussion of this. And because there were people who were well thought of people who were pretty well convinced, and Marcel was one of them, and I knew all of those people out of Walker because we had remotes out there and we did lots of broadcasts out of there. So I don't think that I think that we just decided that for Walt Hott's sake and so forth, that we would sit tight and accept whatever it was, even though in our innermost minds we had real question about the validity of it.
Had they ever treated a story like this before?
Had they ever created one?
Had they ever treated a story in this way?
Oh, not in this particular way, because this was a highly unique experience. However, as I say, we were used to it because if there were crashes, we didn't say anything about it until the people had been there and all of that sort of thing.
Well, yeah, they embargoed.
Yes, precisely.
But this was a total clamp down.
Well, I would say so. It certainly was as far as we were concerned.
I mean, there was no time limit on this.
They didn't say after such and such
anything
date
like
you
that
can...
before?
I can't tell you because, you see, I just got down here in '46 when I came down here from Pillsbury in Minneapolis. And so I hadn't run into that sort of thing. there was lots of it when we were in the missile site business down there and so forth, because if there was a problem, we were advised and we were out there with our blinking lights and all that sort of stuff, but we sat on those things until there were decent releases on it. People have asked me, because there's been a discussion, particularly after your broadcast, and that revitalized. In fact, I was up in Craig, Colorado last week, and a guy who hasn't been interested at all of a sudden he's a fan, and I sent him the book from Moore and so forth when I got home here on the weekend. But the point is that insofar as I was concerned, people say, do you think it was true? And I said, I don't know. But I'll tell you this, it's hard for me to believe that in this infinitesimally small area of the universe that we're the only people with any intelligence. So if there are, and another thing that interested me is because I had a friend who had a lot of hours with, I think it was with Northwest at that time, and he had, I don't know how many hours as captain, and when he said he saw something off the left wing, here's a guy who, when he makes a statement, if you're a disbeliever or an unbeliever, you say, boy, I don't want to fly with him because I think he's a nut. So he puts his own business in jeopardy, as it were.
So W. Whitmore had Brazel overnight.
Yeah.
Did you actually see Brazel himself? Did you actually?
Only when they first came in, yeah.
How did he come across to you?
I didn't talk to him very much. We were, frankly, we were hiding the things for Halloween, and we didn't want to make much of a stir on it. And Whitmore's lived way out on East 2nd. So that's about it.
Did, so Brazel is with Walt Whitmore overnight.
Yeah.
Did the military come and pick him up, or did Whitmore take him to?
I think he turned him over.
Would it be fair to say that Whitmore surrendered him to the military, or is
I
that
don't
too
think
strong?
so, because he was just a guest overnight.
Okay. So
you don't surrender a guest unless your name is this guy over in Iraq.
But was the military was looking for him, though?
I think so.
Yeah. Was W. Whitmore hiding Brazel from the military or from your rivals?
We just had a good story.
So Whitmore was more worried about protecting his story than the military finding where Brazel was.
We had no reason to hide him out, particularly, except we wanted to do some talking to him first. It so happened that it was all for nothing because we didn't use it.
Okay, so that next morning Whitmore decided he wanted to go out to the crash site.
No, I decided that.
You decided.
I wanted to go out because Whitmore had been out there.
Been out to the crash site, or?
Yeah, I think, but I don't know, he couldn't get any closer than I did. I thought we could do it with a back road or something.
So you followed the back roads out toward Corona.
Sure.
What happened when you got out toward the crash
Well,
site?
they just had some roadblocks, that was all.
And when it was on one of the back roads?
Well, they had the whole thing. You used the word cordon a minute ago. I presume that might be a pretty one. I didn't pay that much attention to it. I wasn't driving. We had another guy, and I was more interested in just getting out there, and disappointed because, believe me, we didn't get close.
You say another guy, do you happen to remember who that was?
I haven't the slightest idea. We had about 6 people working for the station.
So you went out to the area, you were stopped by the...
Sure.
How did they do that?
They just say, sorry, the road's closed, this is a restricted area.
Military men?
Yeah, we were used to that.
Were they in a Jeep, were they in a car?
I can't imagine. I imagine they were just one of their blue sedans that they had.
And as you approached, the fella came out on the road and waved you down?
Sure. But as a matter of fact, the reason I'm so vague, I don't mean to be intentionally, is because of that thing, it wasn't really a big deal. Because we'd had these experiences before where some accident had happened and where they just kind of blocked off the whole area. So it was perfectly reasonable as far as I was concerned.
So you didn't get out to the site, you were turned around at that point and came back to Roswell.
How close did you get, roughly?
I'll bet I wasn't within 15 miles. I don't know. I haven't any idea because at that time, as I say, it wasn't important. We wanted to see the stuff we heard about. And of course, by that time, it was all picked up, certainly that day. That's about the story.
You said the stuff you heard about. What did you hear? What do you recall?
Well, one of the things that I still remember specifically is that the material, they said, was as thin as the wrapper on a Lucky Strike package, but you couldn't break it, and if you twisted it and scrunched it up together, it would come back to its own deal. They tried to burn it, and so forth, and it was a good mystery for a small town. But of course, we had a large, at that particular time, we had a lot of military people here, as you know.
Do you notice any extraordinary military activity in town at that time?
Of course, everybody started watching the sky.
So there was an attitude within the town itself.
Oh, very aware. And my thought was, looking back to the old days of the invasion, if you remember.
War of the Worlds.
Yeah, and the effect it had on people on the East Coast particularly. And I thought that perhaps maybe this was a good reason. I have reason now to believe that it was more than just protecting the public from getting upset over something. Because after that, you know, we got into the Lubbock Lights and all of these sort of things. And people that I knew who were highly respectable, people, long-time guys, ranchers and people like that, who saw some of these things, and they had no reason to kid anybody about standing on the side of their pickup and watching these lights go back and forth up in the mountains. They're not the sort of people who needed to do that, or was it their nature to be that sort of person?
Around the station, what was the general reaction to the weather balloon story?
Hell, the weather balloons were being launched about a block from us every night. Because they did that with the Weather Bureau at that time. That's how they got their readings. So weather balloons per se were not that interesting to us.
So you didn't buy that explanation?
We really didn't, but we didn't have any good reason because that material was scattered up there, as you well know, and it wasn't like being able to see where something goes down and there's a hell of an explosion and there's a big dark place.
Did you ever have occasion to talk to, say, Colonel Blanchard or any of the people out at the base after this event and subsequent years and learn anything from them? Maybe they said something to you off?
I don't think so. Bill Blanchard was one of the first guys I knew out there because he had served under my uncle, who was a general in the Air Force. In fact, we had 4 guys out there who were commanders who had all been students under him down at what used to be Keller, down in San Antonio. So I always made it a point to meet those people because they're nice people, and we entertained them a few times, and we would go in there for a drink or something on occasion. But no, we didn't discuss it. And I don't know why we didn't, because that would have been the time to try to find out something, as it were.
Mm-hmm.
After Whitmore turned Brazel over to the military, you saw him after this. Did he ever?
Did I see
You saw Whitmore, certainly.
Oh, sure.
The first chance you had to ask him about the wire recording.
I do not know, in retrospect, why I didn't. I just figured it was a dead story, and...
What you're saying is that Whitmore never told you what the rancher said?
Oh, just plain discussion, but the rancher didn't say much. The rancher merely said, hey, I was out and I was riding and I saw this and this is what it looked like and I couldn't figure out what it was. And so I came to town to tell some people and mentioned it to some people, and pretty soon there was great interest. And so I don't think that he himself went in there and did a lot of pseudo-scientific experiments with this material. There were all sorts of stories about bodies being loaded into planes and all that sort of stuff. And part of that first bunch went right down to Fort Worth, to Carswell. The rest of them, I understood, went back to Oh, hell, who's at Akron?
You mean Dayton, right
Dayton?
field?
Right field.
Yeah, Dayton. Yeah.
Do you say others, you mean other aircraft, or?
Yeah, the presumption was.
Do you hear any bizarre stories of aliens running loose in Roswell at the time, or anything
No.
like that?
No, we did not. We probably would. We've probably been too scared to notice it. After all, that was all pre-ET, and we didn't know how friendly these folk are.
So basically, all you really know is a little bit of what Whitmore told you about the rancher finding the debris,
Sure.
coming into town,
Sure.
and then attempting yourself to go out to the site and being turned back,
Yeah.
and receiving the phone call. Now, are you sure it was Clinton Anderson's office and not?
No, but I would assume so. He's our senator.
Could it have been Dennis Chavez? At the
Oh, well,
time?
it could have been Dennis Chavez, I presume.
So,
That was good enough for us because at that particular time, you didn't go around wrestling with the FCC if you could help it. They gave you enough trouble on other things. Sitting out on a hill and monitoring you with a lousy 250 watts at that time.
to make sure you weren't putting out bad information.
Oh, bad information, and or ASCAP was out there trying to find if we were playing some of their stuff and not reporting it. So we had all of the government that we needed.
Any information about the rancher in the next couple of days?
No, I don't.
Did you have an impression where he was? If
I do not recall. It's very possible. But all I know, he didn't come back into the station or anything like that.
Did you ever see Brazel after that?
I never did. But that's not unusual. These guys all live hell and gone away, as you know. And we were busy at that time. And I had a small staff. 3 or 4 guys working from the base who were working part-time and so forth. And as I say, in retrospect, if we'd had any idea of what we had and what general interest there would be, why then it would have been easy, and we would have, obviously we would have sat down and said, let's see if we can find out this and that, and put 2 and 2 together and get something.
Did the military ever come by the station to pick up press releases or anything like that? No indication that the military came back to make sure there was nothing left behind that might?
No, I don't think so, because we were very close to the PIO department, and because they were a source of news, and even if they had one, I don't think it would have made a great mental note after all of these years, because it was not that uncommon a situation.
through the years, and certainly since the resurrection of all the stories involved, any people that you've talked to, any former colleagues or anyone else that ever voiced an opinion or related any tidbits of information to you?
Oh, that I didn't have?
Mm-hmm.
No, because it was usually, do you believe this stuff? And it so happened that I believed it to some extent at that time, and then ultimately I just felt more and more that this was a possibility. It was nicely hushed up, let me put it that way. That's a general way of putting it.
So you weren't that concerned that the military came in and suggested that you not release the story? That sort of thing happened on a regular basis?
Oh, yes. Oh, sure.
Whether it was an aircraft accident or maybe something that...
Well, see, we were trying to cover all of that stuff at the local level because that's what we had. That's all we had. And so in the 2 stations with which I was associated over a period of time, we always had mobile units, and we could broadcast and so forth. And even in those days, if there was a story, why, we chased it pretty hard.
But for this one, you didn't really think there was a story? Because
I didn't think we were going to be able to do anything with it. I thought that whatever they were going to report, because the question was in many minds here, if whatever they were going to report, that's what we would tell them. so the people would know.
So there was no place for you to go with the story?
No, because we really didn't have the story. We had a discussion with a guy who had found some stuff, but they did a good job of closing that thing up. Hell, Marcel was out of here in, I don't know, 4 or 5 days, I imagine. There were some people that were shipped out. Maybe that had been planned for 90 days, but the coincidence of it made people say, boy, we didn't get him out of here.
Was there much talk among the townspeople?
Oh, my, yes. Sure. It's the most exciting thing that happened since they sold the prize bull at the 4-H sale.
Covering all the big news.
Yes, I mean, secondary story, but next to the bull.
Was there any general tone to the public reaction? That they believed it, they didn't believe it, whatever?
I wouldn't have any idea, because we never did run a poll or anything like that. I would suggest that there were some people who said, boy, this must be a big story, or they wouldn't have made such an effort. And others who said, some nut.
And so it
was a weather balloon, and that's good enough for me if they told me it was a weather balloon, by George.
Which side were you on?
I was in the middle between at that time. I am obviously have gone to the there was such a thing now, but only on the basis of small bore logic that, as to repeat myself, if we think with this little dot, and it's getting smaller and smaller all the time, even though this thing isn't working too well up there now, but the fact is that for us to consider the fact that we are the only people with the intelligence to do that, and there's been so much stuff to the contrary since those days that I don't know. All I know is I think that to keep repeating myself, which I don't mean to do, but you can cut it, I presume. But the point is that why should we think in this little weensy part of the universe that we are the only people who were ever created with any intelligence? I know people who think there are other intelligences in space that are perhaps way ahead of us. And this might have been, maybe somebody came down and said, hey, we saw some flares down on that little old place over here on the atomic test. We saw some flares, we thought we'd send somebody down and take a look, see what was going on. And so they did, and they had the misfortune to do some bad navigating or something.
Well, that's a new way of putting it.
How did you know which ranch to go to?
Because we talked to the guy when he came to town.
And he actually told you, he gave you directions or told you?
All of these old timers knew exactly where the ranch was. Mm-hmm. Everybody knew where all of these ranches were. Big ranches at that time. And, I was busy in the station, and that was a very busy 7-day-a-week job.
Fishing tackle, buy some bait, park themselves, by the river. It's not an out-of-the-way spot, Mark. There's a big motorway bridge of Highway 90 goes over the river. They passed a no entry sign driving in, which Calvin remarked, and Charlie says, don't worry about it. Remember, Calvin knew nothing about this area. Mm-hmm. So they're fishing away, and these blue lights appear from behind them, and it shimmers out across the water. Calvin immediately thinks about the no entry sign. He thinks it's the police. We're going to spend the night in jail for trespassing, However, when both men turned around, it wasn't the police. There was this large rugby ball shaped object descending. It stopped about 2 feet above the ground, and it was giving off this intense blue light. There was 2 lights at one end, and then this opening appeared, almost as if by magic. There was no sliding door. It was just there. These three humanoid creatures literally floated out. Again, they didn't touch the floor. They were described as being about 5'4", head, no neck, had pointed protrusions out of the side and one out the front. Their arms were a bit longer than ours. They had mitten or crab-like appendages. Their legs were stuck together. The legs never moved. And their skin, if that's what it was grey, but wrinkly, a bit like that of an elephant. Two got hold of Charlie, one got hold of Calvin, and they were both instantly paralyzed. The only thing they could move was their eyes. They were floated towards this opening. Going inside, Charlie went to the right and Calvin to the left. Both gentlemen were put on a transparent table. Calvin said this thing came down from the ceiling. It was like about the size of a pack of cards. And went around him making a clicking noise. Charlie said this thing like a big eye did a similar thing to him. The major difference was that Calvin's lying on this bed. This big ugly creature, as he called it, he stood to one side, just stood there. And he heard a noise from behind him, and another being appeared that looked pretty much human, but female. The only difference was the middle fingers were somewhat longer and pointed. And at one point, she put these in his throat and up the back of his throat, which hurt. They removed his lower clothing, his shoes and socks. And Calvin said at one point, they stuck something in his foot and it hurt. And he felt this warm sensation go up him. He said it was almost as if the blood was draining out of him and it was being replaced with something else. He didn't know that's what was happening. It's just an impression he got. He was dressed, and then he was able to move for a short period. And he managed to get hold of this female and bang her head against the wall. And she pointed to the other creature, got hold of Calvin. He was paralyzed again. Next thing he remembers, he's outside, back on the pier with Charlie shouting at him, "Are you all right, son? Are you all right? Are you all right?" And they turned around and this thing literally went straight up and gone. So they argued about what to do. Calvin said, "There's no way we're telling her what he would think we're nuts." Plus he'd just got engaged. And he said, "There's no way my future father-in-law is going to let me marry Waynette, his wife-to-be." So they said, "Right, we won't tell anybody." They go back to the car, which is brand new. As they open the passenger door, the window falls out. It's completely shattered. Calvin gets in. He said it took him about 20 attempts to start it. So they set off, and en route, Charlie has a change of heart. He says, "No, we got to tell somebody. What if these things come back and do this to somebody else? What if it's an invasion?" So Calvin agrees on one condition. He said, "Well, I'll admit what I saw, but I don't want to talk about what happened on board. I'll say I passed out." So Charlie said, "That's fine. I'll tell them what happened on board." So they're pulling at a shop that's got a payphone. This is 1973, of course. They have no coins for the payphone. So they managed to ring nearby Keesler Air Force Base. Charlie had been in the army and had fought in Korea, so it was a natural for him to ring the airbase. And they said, "We don't do UFOs anymore. Ring your local officials." So they rang the police. They said, "Stay there. We'll send a car out." So they did. They gave them a sobriety check, walk in a straight line, touch your nose with your eyes, all that kind of thing. And they escort them in town, and they end up at the sheriff's department with Sheriff Fred Diamond and his deputies. They are interviewed separately, and then they're placed in a room together. And the deputy goes in a desk next to them, and he does something. They have no idea what he's doing. And he walks out and he leaves them alone. Unbeknownst to them, there is a tape recorder in the desk. And the deputy comes back a few minutes later, again goes to the desk, takes something out. They have no idea what it is. And they think, right, we'll have them now. They'll be laughing and joking. But of course they weren't. Calvin Parker, he's literally, Mark, crawling up the walls. And so it gives the law enforcement a change of heart. They now believe the two men because they were so scared, and scared beyond belief. And they said, "Well, there's nothing we can do. You better go home." So they don't tell anybody, please. So that just, you know.
In different parts of the West, especially, and where the government retrieved them. And this started a lot of the rumors of government secrecy and strange objects coming out of the sky. And the Japanese call these balloons fugo balloons. And as I've pointed out before and in some articles, it's very likely that what was found at Roswell, New Mexico, was the remains of a fugo balloon. There are 7 museums in the United States that have a display of fugo balloons. The Smithsonian had a fully rigged fugo balloon on display for some years. And some of the museums in Oregon and Washington have fugo balloon material on display. So anyone who reads the books on Roswell, if you're really interested in it, you can go to one of these museums and see the kind of material that was found at Roswell, because it fits the description of the Roswell witnesses exactly. Only at Roswell did they think that it was something else. Usually when they find a fugo balloon, people are smart enough to figure out, gee, it must be a balloon. At Roswell, they said, gee, it must be a flying saucer. We're still finding these damn things. In North Dakota in 1990, they found one in the Black Hills that had probably been there for 45 years. And they found the remains of it. Of course, after 45 years, a lot of it just rotted away. But they found enough so they could identify it as a fugo balloon. In 1990, the Japanese television network sent a camera team to the United States, and they toured the United States. And they interviewed all the fugo balloon witnesses who were still alive. There were a lot of them. And then they did a 2-hour documentary on fugo balloons on December 7th, 1991. And their approach was, gee, we're sorry we did this. And the Japanese school children last year made thousands of origami birds and things out of paper, and sent this to Oregon, to the state of Oregon, as a gift in tribute to the people. Some people in Oregon had been killed by these bombs, as a tribute to these people who had died in the fugo balloon attacks. There is a college professor here in the United States he's Japanese, and I can't pronounce his name, but he's sort of made a hobby out of the fugo balloons, and he's the leading expert on it, and he's talked to all the witnesses. After I did some articles on it, we got some strange letters from people who recalled seeing these during the war and after the war. And I got 3 letters in particular that are very interesting and that we're now checking out. People who claimed that some of these balloons were manned, and they saw these balloons. One woman was living near Hanford, which is an atomic bomb plant, and she saw this balloon very close to the ground, and there was something in it that she thought at first was a monkey. And when she got closer to it, she realized that it was a little man. And of course, Japanese were small in stature, and if you're going to build balloons to cross the Pacific, you want a small person, lightweight person, to be in them. And she said that right after she watched this balloon bounce across the landscape and fly away, several jeeps pulled up with American soldiers in them, and one of the officers asked her not to mention this to anybody. This was a practice at the time. They didn't want the Japanese to find out that these balloons were getting here, and so they kept most of it out of the newspapers. And this started, in a way, a lot of our Men in Black kind of stories that we later heard in the UFO field. Because the FBI also would call students together in a schoolroom and warn them that these balloon bombs were coming, and that if they ever saw one, they should not, spread the news. They should keep it to themselves. One of these balloons did get into a very small newspaper out west, and within 2 weeks, the story appeared in the Japanese newspapers in Japan. That's how good their spy system was. So the government plan to keep it a secret was quite effective. And there are books about this secrecy, very well documented books. There's one by a man named Bert Weber called The Silent Siege. But if the Japanese were able to send over even a few manned balloons, then we would have another explanation for a lot of the stories that came out immediately after the war of the government picking up little men from the desert and so on. There are a number of these stories are being revived now by the Roswell fans. It's very likely that maybe a dozen of these balloons had been manned, because they were planning to do that on a big scale, but they never did it. That is, they didn't send over thousands of balloons with men in them, but they may have sent over a few, half dozen or a dozen, just to see if it would work. And that's probably what all of these stories are about. We know that there was one crash saucer story from Mexico that was a Fuga balloon story, but at the time nobody knew about Fuga balloons, and the American Army went into Mexico and carried out the remains of the Fuga balloon.
And I guess, you know, you could start using AI to really dig into quantum physics and parallel universes, and
yeah, I'm sure that's happening as we speak.
Yeah,
I'm sure it is.
and it's just going to escalate because, you know, what's the curve called? I can't remember that curve where like technology just suddenly just goes really quickly. I wish I could remember what it was. So there's that. So AI understanding the kind of scientific nature of the quantum world and how that can affect different universes, parallel universes, different vibrational frequencies, and that might help us start to, you know, reach those different dimensions, which may help us start to have clearer contact with aliens in a kind of a safer environment than this kind of random encounters that we're having now, maybe. I think AI is going to have a lot of influence in...
Or maybe ET's been waiting for us
to
develop our AI so that we can make contact.
Yeah.
Interesting.
But I think there's a lot more to come in that space. But even understanding like black holes and how they relate to moving between dimensions or time travel, and the world's our kind of oyster in terms of AI. It's going to be giving us lots of answers, and the escalation of the ability of AI to understand our world and the quantum world within a decade, things are going to be we're going to view the world so differently. And I think some of these alien experiences, UFOs, will be a big part of that. We've just got to wait a decade.
Okay.
I think that's
I think so, yeah.
well,
Cool. Can't see we missed anything out.